Hey guys, it's Frederik of the FWX podcast. I want to talk about villains this time. I've talked a lot about heroes and different aspects when it comes to storytelling. I specifically want to talk about something that you also see with heroes, but then also with villains as well. And so there's a thing called the hero's journey, which has been used as terminology for the actual path that they go on to. And that tends to go any way possible. Think of it like a tree from the beginning, from the roots to the top of the tree, and it branches off into many more different ways. And there's a similar interesting thing that happens with villains as well. And that's what I want to talk about here, the villain's journey. And I'm going to use a lot of examples to point that out. And also, we'll go over some of that terminology as well. But before I do that, I want you guys to know that you can like this video. You can also subscribe to the channel that makes this podcast become more available to people who like this kind of content. And especially when I'm talking in this case about fantasy items, talk about, well, in this case, there's many different examples when it comes to fiction itself, but I talk a lot about pulp fiction, popular culture as well, and like sci-fi, action, fantasy, historic to some extent as well. If you've seen any of my stuff here, I talk a lot about movies. I talk a lot about action. I talk also about music to some extent on my other podcasts, which you can check out. But for this one, we'll focus on pop culture and also specifically the evil of it. And then you can also share this with friends and family or your people at your work, your colleagues, or maybe just here online. And you can comment away in the comment section if you want to, but I would advise you to keep it polite and friendly. And finally, I'm not a native English speaker, so if I get something wrong, if I mispronounce something, if I lose my train of thought, if any of those things happen, that is purely human. So I want you to know that. Okay, let's get into this. Let's talk about the villain's journey. And like I said, this is basically the opposite of a hero's journey, in which a hero has every opportunity to grow. And one of the key things, first and foremost, when it comes to villains, is that they don't think of themselves as a villain. And it goes into that phrase from The Dark Knight. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Okay, let's get into this. So, I'm getting a little smaller here on the screen so you can follow me while I'm talking about all of this. So, here we are. So, first and foremost, this is a narrative arc that mirrors the opposite of what the hero goes through. In this case, it focuses on like twisting stuff, getting corrupted, getting into the wrong kind of things. And I say it like this because I wasn't just going to straight up read you what's highlighted in that AI overview here. Um, let's get into some of those key stages here. But also, a few more things that are below this in the AI overview. Oftentimes, this needs a trigger. Like something needs to happen before. Like it can be a choice, for instance. And actually, I'm gonna head back to me for a moment again because uh, it might be something as simple as jealousy. Like if someone has something you haven't, and your inclination is to the character you're writing, for example. Imagine you're writing a book in this case. That's how I'm trying to address this. So if you're creating a villain, be aware that it can be very simple when it comes to the trigger of it. It could be jealousy, it could be something simple like uh, oftentimes talk about crimes and felonies and all of that. It could be as simple as a misdemeanor thing, like I'm doing this just once. I'm not gonna fall into that. I'm not gonna get into that trap of keep doing it and doing it and doing it. But there's something also about the rush of things, like a high of sorts, meaning a rush of adrenaline, a feeling that makes you feel good. But when you're actually doing something bad, that's also part of it. That could be something that you could use in your writing. Okay, let's get into this a bit more. So there's what I just said, and then there's obviously these key stages. Again, the number two is call to adventure or the wound, which could be a traumatic event, and that could start the transformation for this character. Next is the refusal of the call, which is they might feel the call for something greater, but the way in which they are going with this could imply what they are like, and could grow in that as well. And that then follows the other part of this is meeting a mentor, for instance. And there's many examples for this. The number one that shoots to my mind for this, I'm gonna get into one of those examples, of course, is Darth Vader or Anakin Skywalker. Uh, I think if you don't know this, that's weird, but spoiler alert if you didn't know this. So Anakin is Darth Vader. We get to see in the Skywalker saga about how he becomes Darth Vader. Let's actually get into some of those images here. So we see a whole bunch of him in his Darth Vader outfit, of course. Here's a bit better. So, it's from a video, but sure. So you see kind of the original version of Anakin. Well, right before his fall to the dark side. It, like I said right there, it's in what I just said, is that he transforms so dramatically that he has no other choice but to put on a specific kind of suit. There's a painting of that. And like I said, if you know the story, you can clearly see where this was going for a long time. And to give you a quick recap of that story, so in the prequel movies that were made in the early 2000s, you get to see the world that Star Wars grew into with I wouldn't say the birth, but kind of like the revitalized, the rebooted Jedi Order in their fame and heights. And then they got in touch with the youngest Anakin. Maybe there's another. Here's an interesting image for that. So you see in a kind of comic kind of version the different forms of Anakin from child to Darth Vader, of course. And so it gradually started to happen. But as we hear from his origin story, is that he, at some point, so actually, let's put that into what I just said there with the journey. He met a mentor. In his case, that was Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then his master for only a brief time. And while I do think that Obi-Wan was an okay mentor, it definitely wasn't perfect. He was very flawed as a human being, and he had kind of a crappy teaching style, which led Anakin taking his first steps towards the dark side, having his own ideas, and that led to him losing an arm at first when they encountered uh, Count Dooku, and that led to a bit more of him losing his way. Anyway, so you gradually saw this evolution of him becoming the villain that he is in Darth Vader until at the very last point, as he was dying, he had that moment with his son, with Luke Skywalker, who turned him, finally, as actually for all of the life that Darth Vader and Anakin had, he just wanted to belong. He wanted someone to trust and care for him, and he started listening to the wrong people. That includes, of course, Emperor Palpatine, Mr. I made a clone of myself so I could live on forever. But ultimately, that's what happened. So that's one of those examples where you get like the failings of the mentor lead you down a darker path. Yeah, let's move on to more of that. Crossing the threshold commits an unforgivable act, crossing over into darkness. There's quite a few people. I'm gonna actually get into this guy, Smeagol and Gollum. So the first step for Smeagol, because we get to see him the way he is in the Lord of the Rings movies because of what initially happens. Because the very first thing that happens is that, like in this picture right here. So Smeagol initially was a hobbit-like creature who liked to do your standard kind of things. I normally wouldn't use political stuff like to say it like this, but he kind of was a hillbilly. He loved being outdoors. He loved hanging out with his friend until one day they were fishing on a lake, and Deagle, Smeagol's friend, and if I'm not mistaken, also cousin, based on the original lore, got swept off his boat into that lake, found the ring, the one ring, as you can see in this picture right here. Maybe there's a better. No. Anyway, so Deagle got off the boat, got pulled into the lake, found the ring, and then the ring played its corruptness onto both of them, and that led to Smeagol killing Deagle for the ring, which is that first step that is highlighted here, crossing the threshold, committing an unforgivable act. And I think there's nothing more unforgivable than killing someone. It's kind of the ultimate crime to do when you think about it. if someone steals from you, if someone commits fraud, if someone lights something on fire, that's all. There's a great there's a gradation system when it comes to misdemeanors, felonies, crimes, uh, to a federal or national security level or whatever. But Smeagol did the unbelievable, and from what I've heard on a channel that I mention a lot, is that basically he couldn't deal with the fact that he did it, and so he created an altar. And so Smeagol effectively has. Oh, I'm losing the term here. But I'm gonna put it differently. As Gollum, this channel that I like reference a lot, uh, puts Gollum out as an alter, as in I remember the name now. Dissociative identity disorder, basically, which is DID, formerly called multiple personality disorder. That is what it is. So basically, Gollum and Smeagol. So originally, Smeagol, who had an alter, he created a different version of himself that could deal with all the dark, all the trauma, all the tragedy that Smeagol initially did because he killed his best friend slash cousin over the ring. And that transformed him literally because the ring is so corrupting. And he held it for so long that we get to see that initial version of him where he's completely thin as hell. There's nothing more than skin over bone. He's got literally only 9 teeth, which is from, yeah, like I said. So that is exactly what happens with Gollum slash Smeagol. Smeagol killed Deagle. He let the ring corrupt him, which is how we got that transformed version of him, where he is almost seen like a goblin kind of thing. But because, like, you can see it in this picture right here, like the just em- emaciated version. I was looking for that word. The emaciated version of Smeagol is the Golem, the evil side of him that we get to see. And there's a good question in, could he really be seen as a villain or not? Well, he chose to kill his friend slash cousin over hmm, over sharing it. That was what I wanted to say there. And so that led him to become who he is in the story of Lord of the Rings, as basically like a third Hobbit goblin look-alike that Sam and Frodo have to deal with. And this leads to him finally being relieved of his task at the very, very end. Of course, I get the end of the movie in my head, I think it might be a little different in the book originally. Okay, let's move on to the next thing right here. Test allies and enemies, building power, gathering minions, and fighting the hero. That kind of makes me think of another one. Another person that I didn't really look up before. So, Gru, not the GRU, that is something completely different. From Despicable Me, voiced by the one and only Steve Carell, is a so felonious Gru, is his complete name, voiced by Steve Carell, who is an amazing actor. And the thing about Gru is that he initially wants to belong too. He's seeking approval from the villain community and his mom. But then the thing that makes him different is that he garnered allies. He's got those little yellow things called the minions. Let's get those little bastards in there. Interestingly enough, we're going to get another Minion movie, by the way. Minions and Monsters. There was a trailer at the Super Bowl for it. And they're his allies. He uses them to do whatever it is he does. I haven't really seen those movies yet. I do know that at one point he also encounters his brother. And so he basically fulfills that key moment here where he has some power. He has his allies, the minions in this case, literally, and that makes him fight the hero. But then what makes him different from the other characters so far is that he is confronted with those three kids. I don't know their names by heart, but I don't know that it's Margot, Penelope, and another one. And they instill some kind of empathy and sympathy in him, which leads him to him finally becoming more friendly, sympathetic, and empathetic, which leads to him forgoing his evil ways as much as he does. Not completely, of course. Okay, let's continue here. Approach to the inmost cave, planning the final grand act of villainy. Can't really think of an example for that, so let's continue. The ordeal, moment of temptation for redemption, or the pet the dog moment showing humanity, which is what I was talking about with Gru here, is that he gets the influence from those three girls, which leads to him doing what he does. I need to actually see the movie to say those things. There's another one. There's, by the way, guys, if you know a character like that, because it's not coming to me right now, but if you know one, put it down below in the comment section, please. Okay, let's continue. Reward, obtaining the power or goal they sought. That could possibly be this guy, Fire Lord Ozai from Avatar: The Last Airbender. And Ozai is an interesting villain when it comes to many other villains. Is that there's a lot of build up. There's a lot of talk about him, about who he is, and I have a video up on the channel where I talk about how you need to show, not tell. And in that, I also point out that you can use the reverse of that to really build up a character you don't meet. until some time, which is what happens with him, especially in the animated series, not in the live action series. Also, it also really helps that he was voiced by Mr. Mark Hamill, who I also have another role of to talk about in a moment. And of course, I'll tease that for you guys. It's this guy, the Joker, in his many different forms. But I was talking about Ozai because that is the interesting thing of him is that there's so much build up, so much talk about him that ultimately we get to see what he really is. And he has that moment where he obtains a specific kind of power. In his case, the comet that is looming over the Earth, Ozin's comet, which gives the firebenders so much power that they're able to do terrible things to the Earth Kingdom by literally burning it down from their blips, I'll say. I know it's a different name, but it's the one I was just thinking of, and I have it in my head from their airships. So that's the interesting thing about him is that he gets built up for so long, and at the right end, right before he is really introduced, like I said, there's that build up for 2.5 seasons, and then we get to know a bit more about him first before he finally shows off what he can do, and that he is more than an okay firebender, but that immense power of that comet looming over just gives him like an epic look. And he's clearly a well trained firebender on par with, at that point, not just his daughter, but also his son, Zuko. I'm gonna point him out, by the way, too, now. Because Zuko is such an interesting case as well, where you're like, is he a villain? Is he a hero? And I think Zuko passes in something that I like to call a tragic hero, which is similar to what's happened with Gollum and also Snape. And I'll get into Snape in a moment. But first, I want to talk a bit more about Zuko, who has his own transformation into finally becoming a hero in his case. But he's clearly scarred for life. He's got that patch of no skin over his eye, who I think he might be one of the best written characters ever, who kind of revitalized this idea of being redeemed, which is what we're talking about as well here. Because it does say here that for the ordeal, the temptation for redemption, a moment where they show humanity. And for Zuko, that was boiling always. Because initially, he had the mentality, had the strength, and the will to survive. That's how he continues to live with the scar in his face, the part of skin that was burned off by his father, who, by the way, is a real dick for doing that. The, that's basically also that's how you show to your country that you're a real piece of work when you're willing to burn your own kid. That's severely messed up to me. But it also makes them interesting as a family, as characters. If you're willing to justify your actions by doing something horrible, in this case, not horrible enough because Zuko got that scar from that moment, from the Agni Kai in that show, which we kind of get to see in that flashback. And then he was also banished, which seems like the smart thing to do in a kids show, by the way. I mean, we talk about kids show, but you see the things that happen in that show, and you think, how in the hell are we still calling this an animated kids show? Because they get away with a lot of stuff, actually. Yeah, brainwashing, mutilating, burning, all the immense atrocities that happen are crazy. And Zuka is just an example of a cycle. Someone who believed in certain things because they were taught to him or fed to him through this, I wouldn't say propaganda, but like being around toxic people or people who are so set in their ways that they see no other way. But then he broke out. He had his mentor as well. Uh, let's actually look him up for a moment. With Iroh, those are arguably one of the coolest duos I could ever talk about. Because Iroh had his own transformation to go through, which is interesting because they mirrored themselves that way. Because Iroh lost his son during the invasion of Ba Sing Se, that learned him humility, that made him learn humility, and he bettered himself for all that time, and actually never stopped being a badass, as we see him escaping in the last season and finally taking over Ba Sing Se from his old country, from his original home country. So these two mirror each other. It's just that at one point, Iroh finally found the peace that he was supposed to have, which led to Zuko finally finding that way himself, which is why we can talk about these two guys. And also, it makes for an interesting story where you can have someone who looks villainous, like having a scar in your face is kind of a trope for a villain or not a villain. Think about Harry Potter, for instance. Like you see that lightning based scar and you think, oh, something went up there, something was up there. Or I'll just say something from myself for a moment. Actually, I'll cut to me for a second for that. Uh, I have a story where a guy went after the murderer of his parents. Then the murderer pinned him down and gave him a scar on this side, on the jaw of a star. So scars are interesting things to show some context in the good side, bad side, or something in between. Like it makes you think deeper about the characters in question. Okay, let's get back to this. I wanted to point it out for a moment because I had that example myself. So, and by the way, you get to see. I hope this picture is big enough for this. Nope, maybe this one. Yeah, that might be big enough. Where you clearly get to see that when they were back in the Western Air Temple, that scar was still healing, and that's from a flashback. This moment, of course. Okay, let's continue to those last steps into becoming a villain. The rollback resurrection, like a total transformation, where they are reborn as an unnatural abomination, a darker version of themselves. Yeah, I think of one person, and heading back to my original fascination with Lord of the Rings, of course, with their ultimate baddie, Sauron, who has many different appearances. And that's also one of those key factors of Sauron, is that he's very much an overarching villain serving in the story of Lord of the Rings, whether it's in the books or in the movies or in the game. But then you get to see it in the series and in the Shadow of Mordor games that actually he did not always have this form. And you get to see the context to which, at the very beginning, in the Fellowship of the Ring with that prologue, how things changed. In that he has this complete armor. Get a better picture here. He's got this complete armor with the. Maybe there's a different one. Well, he's so armored up. And there might be a reason for that, I think. There is also, I think I talked about this in another video talking about Lord of the Rings. Originally, they were going to show him in his, I'm going to say, Anglified version, his original version, fighting against Aragorn at the very end, at the gates to Mordor. But they opted not to do that because it would be more interesting that way. Because, I mean, just like it is shown in the new show, Rings of Power, is that he, Sauron, I should say it, he's a Maiar. He has many different appearances. He's basically a, there's a specific word for this, where you change appearances depending on the situation. And for Rings of Power and also for the Shadow of Mordor game, we get to see him in his fair form of Anatar and in an elven-like appearance to be dealing with the actual creator of the rings, Celebrimbor. What was the damn name again? A shapeshifter. That was it. I almost didn't come up with that word again. A shapeshifter is what Sauron is, which is a really interesting thing for a villain to be, because then he can easily twist minds, lie, manipulate people, which is all part of his shtick. His shtick with Sauron. He's got an original other name that I'm forgetting right now, but that is one of those things where that makes him, despite, especially in the movie, not really shown. But the one thing we do get to see about him is, of course, the eye of Sauron. And I want to bring up the games again for a moment. Not Shadow of Mordor, but the initial Battle for Mordor game, the strategy RTS game, which I love playing at the time. And when you are playing as one of the good sides against the Mordor faction, you get to see the eye go around, and every so often you get to hear "I see you," just like in the moments from the movie where Frodo has put on the ring and Sauron is talking to him. And I didn't mean to rhyme again. Yeah, so that's what makes Sauron an interesting villain, is that he's a shapeshifter initially, It's just that at one point, the amount of power he has depends. No, I'm gonna say it differently. Um, his power, as especially when it comes to clinging onto the ring, changes his appearance. So initially he was that. He could be in a different form. This is not the right form here. That's just one of those uh, wraith worshipping people from the show. He had this fair form on this side, by the way. And I do have to say, I know it gets a lot of flack from people. The show, The Rings of Power. Personally, I love it. Give me anything back in Lord of the Rings and in that world, and I will watch it. Especially watch it. I used to be quite a bit of a gamer, as I just said. We're talking about that RTS game, Battle of Mordor. I kind of stepped off from that, but I still love it. I love that universe. I love talking about it as you're experiencing right now, of course. Okay. There's a few more villains I want to talk about here. Um, there's one last part here. Return of the Elixir. Failure or triumph, usually resulting in a lasting change to their world, often leaving a permanent echo or scar of their evil. I want to head back actually for a moment back to Sauron. If you watch the show at the very end, spoiler alert if you haven't, you see in the very first season that part of the plan for his orcs is to reform the lands of Mordor into the cesspit that we see that it is in the initial movies. Because originally it was quite lush and had different environments, but it had to change, which gave us the look that we get, where it's just nothing but fire and ash, and with Mount Doom and everything. It's from the show. So, like a literal transformation of the world itself, so he could live the way it does. Let's think. There's a few more villains I want to talk about here. So, I talked about tragic characters, and Snape is definitely also one of those, especially in his amazing portrayal by Alan Rickman, who was an amazing actor, kind of known for playing villains himself and other characters as well. And the question with him really was, who was he a double agent for? And also with that new show, uh, it's become a controversial figure, to say the least. He was always a controversial figure because he bullies kids. And, well, since I'm someone talking about stories, not just original text or adaptation or anyway, that's what makes his name such an interesting character, is that his journey is one of grief and power to some extent and authority, and becoming a professor at Hogwarts is one of those. And also, the head of Slytherin House is also another part of that. And he clearly also has to help in one side or the other. It gets unclear. about that. And I think that's the point of him. He's got his own damn tragic story where things went wrong for such a long time initially. And this is where I want to bring up my idea of an of a Marauders TV series that I would watch the shit out of. Like, even if it shows them as teenagers, it would be so interesting to see James Potter, who was a bully himself, stop embracing that role and becoming a better person, the difference, while the opposite happens to Snape, who got bullied by James. Huh. Now I think about it, we don't really know why he did that. My guess is just like with every day for ourselves, is that we often seek out the things that are different and weird from us and put that in question, especially in schools in a more physical way. And it isn't like in our adult lives that it's about power or dominance or status, but more about trying to find your identity and becoming who you are initially. And as kids, we have less inhibition about that, which is why initially I just have the fun. Am I actually figuring out right now why kids are the way they are? Yeah, it's so funny. Is that the search for your identity can lead to many, many things. And the question of that is, what where does that lead you exactly? And for Snape, it turned to grief, it turns to power and authority and all of that as he seemingly loved Lily Evans Snape Potter or otherwise. And yeah, they got him to be the way he is. Also, it's in his clothing, by the way. He's completely covered in black, as you can clearly see. Which is yet another one of those. Actually, I'm gonna head back to me for that. This is another one of those dead giveaways, basically. Whenever a villain, I talked about how a scar clearly shows one thing or the other. It depends on the nuance and the context. I wanted to say complex, but it might be one and the same in this case. The complexity and the context leads to what you think of it. But appearance is a huge thing, of course, with this. And likely, if someone is wearing darker clothes, they tend to have darker thoughts, maybe. And I know this myself. I like wearing darker clothes myself too, but not to the extent of wearing black all the time. And there's different examples of this. I'll bring some up, by the way, for this, uh, including someone I'm not too fond of myself. So, like I said, someone I'm not too fond of. The Queen from the Disney movie has that transformation into the hag that we see. And what does she wear? I want the initial. She is also mostly wearing black clothes. A huge cloak, for what it seems like. And actually, I'm getting the chills right now. I'm gonna stop with this. There's another character that does this as well. Someone I've talked to a little about before. That is Palpatine. who interestingly also has something of a villain's journey himself, acquiring power and a status with authority as a senator, who gradually changes and then also starts to, I just said, I've mentioned that channel before in different videos. Uh, so the cinematherapy guys have talked about the fact that he's basically a groomer, and he is manipulating constantly, and he has his tentacles all over things. That's why the Clone Wars happened. That is why Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader, and he too is wearing all black by the end. And not only is he evil, he's got some. Um, that was not what I intended. Yeah. So again, wearing all black tends to be a dead giveaway for someone being uh, having bad behavior, ill ways, uh, bad abilities, and bad abilities meaning for the sake of maliciousness, basically doing bad things for the sake of it. It's kind of a dead giveaway, and they're not the only ones. Of course, like I said with Darth Vader too, he also wears completely all black, almost constantly, which is what makes him such an interesting villain. Also, I do think that kind of like in this shot right here, or in other shots where that helmet seems like a lot of fun to light up and give you a very showcase storytelling. Like, what is going on internally? Are they doing something good? Are they doing something bad? Because, like I said, initially at the end, he kind of turns back to the better side, which is also how we finally get that Force Ghost of him. Finally. Okay, I haven't talked about Marvel and DC yet. Uh, I want to highlight another dark cloaked person or being for a moment. So let's also talk about influence for a moment. So Tolkien made up the Nazgul, the Wraiths, the Ring Wraiths, who were once powerful men, kings, who were corrupted by their rings. And I think Rowling must have seen that, and that's how she got her idea for the Dementors, or depressed, sick creatures who suck out all the life and joy out of people. And they're resembled well, I have to say. For something so bad, and also interestingly, what they do is bad, but are they really seen as evil? That's a good question, right? Okay, one more thing that I want to share here, and that's pertaining to the superhero stuff. Another person with quite a transformation is, of course, Wanda Maximoff or the Scarlet Witch. Also, key thing, becomes the Scarlet Witch through her journey. Again, you notice with all the examples that I'm saying here, there is almost always a transformation. Either it's a choice or opportunity or a different way. Like I said, it could be something as simple as jealousy or thinking one bad thing will not be enough, but then actually You serialize that. I mean, that's also one of the reasons I'm gonna actually get back to me for this. That's one of the reasons why we get so much stuff about serial killers. Is that once was not enough. They need to do it over and over and over. And in their case, I think it's also pertaining to pop culture. Usually, it's more than 3 times. It's at 3 times that we start calling them to be a serial criminal. In case of a serial killer, literally when they murder 3 people. And yeah, it's to that point that we get that much about police procedurals and horror shows and thrillers and all of that. And we get a lot of that. Okay, let's talk about Wanda and another couple of interesting characters. Obviously, also, there's a huge thing about adaptations, of course, because originally the Scarlet Witch and Wanda are originally from the Marvel Comics. They're portrayed as they like. I personally think that Wanda is an interesting character when it comes to this, because is she really a villain or is she not? Uh, the thing with her is that she goes through so much peril and loss and grief, which is also why I love that series and the quotes that came from it, like the "What is love? What is grief if not love?" You know that quote. I'm miss saying it, of course, but that is what it comes down to. Let me just quickly look it up for a moment. What is grief if not love persevering? That is the quote. And there's another one from the very end that is also key here. Also, there's this quote from Agatha Harkness. This is Chaos Magic Wanda. That makes you the Scarlet Witch. Where were we with this? Here. Uh, yeah. So, for her, the transformation is all that grief, all that loss, all that possibility, and the creating of an alternate world, basically. An alternate reality is that with her power, she's able to make an alternate. Hmm, well, that's a good question, actually. How far are her limitations exactly? She's a powerful being, the Scarlet Witch. In the comics, she has that no more mutants thing. She makes the town of Westview her own. I'll put it like that. She comes into confrontation with Agnes, of course. So yeah, interesting character who you might not really be thinking as a villain or a hero, but a complex, tragic character, which kind of puts her in the same kind of place as Snape and Gollum to some extent. Obviously, differently because she is, at least for most of what we see in pop culture, a woman with a lot of power. Speaking of Marvel villains, I think there's no bigger one right now than Mr. Thanos, who I think had something of a journey himself too. We don't really know that much about him, except that he, evolutionary wise, is. I'm gonna actually bring up the Eternals for a moment, because he is linked to that, of course. Because initially we do also get to see his brother. He's got a brother played by. Oh, here he is. The pic of that. Harry Styles plays Star Fox in a in the last moment of the Eternals, and they're clearly very very different. Ah, here it is from the info. He's an eternal deviant warlord from the moon Titan. And Titan is that planet, of course. And the thing with Thanos, of course, is that he believes himself to be doing the right thing, and he has a justification for that. Which is kind of the thing about him is that he did not always really have the resources, but he built his allies, he built his army, he has the Black Order, he has immense power when he gets the Infinity Gauntlet and all the stones, which grants him finally the ability in Infinity War to snap all, if not half, especially half of life away from the universe, disrupting it for a long time until the Avengers change it in the movies, of course. And so that's the thing with him is that he sort of has this transformation himself, as it is shown in the movies, the Avengers movies specifically, and the background information in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, which I have also made videos about. You can find that in the thing above. And also, it's been rumored that he might appear again in the next installment of the Avengers. So I'm interested in what's about to happen also because I'm a huge Josh Brolin fan, especially in this version. And yeah, I would very gladly see him again in this role. We'll see what happens. So he feels very justified in his actions. He thinks himself to be a good guy, but his ways and his abilities are unliked, and his intentions seem to be right, but he goes about it the wrong way. And also, there's an interview at the Graham Norton show where he was talking with Michael Fassbender, who also played an incredible villain in Marvel related content as Magneto, about if you could kill half the universe, you could just double the universe's resources. That's what he says in that interview, which kind of has a good point actually. If you could just kill half, you could just double the universe's resources. So that makes him an interesting villain, to say the least. And of course, that leads to him being who he is. Someone willing to do the hard things. And it's also in that script that he has. He's got an amazing couple of lines. He's also one of those characters that I love to re say those phrases because it's almost like a masterful painting in script form. Like, I would love to know who actually made that script. Uh, Maybe, guys, if you can find that out, I would love it if you put that below in the comments. Okay, that's where we're going to end this episode of the FWX podcast. Guys, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Before I go, you can like this video. You can also subscribe to the channel and the podcast that makes this video and the podcast more available to people who like this kind of content. When I'm talking about story elements, characters, and world building as well, and also action movies, franchises, stuff like that, where I talk about all of that. So thank you for watching. Thank you for coming here. And I hope to see you in the next episode of the FWX podcast. See ya.